When a blizzard hit the Wind River Mountains, a retired Navy SEAL and his canine, Rex, thought they'd face another silent night. But Rex sensed something in the storm. A wrecked car, a stranger fighting for her life. That rescue would pull them into a deadly secret buried deep in the snow and force Ethan Cole to become a soldier one last time. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe fate still finds those who are lost, hit like, subscribe, and stay till the end. The storm had no mercy that night. Wind River Mountains disappeared beneath sheets of white, and the air carried a howl that could pierce bone. Inside a lonely wooden cabin, the fire struggled to live, flickering against the walls like a dying heart. Ethan Cole sat by it, elbows on his knees, his weathered hands wrapped around a dented metal cup. His reflection in the tin was ghostly. Gray-streaked hair, beard untrimmed, lines of fatigue carved deep by years of desert sun and sleepless nights. Once a Navy SEAL, now a man alone. Silence was all he had kept after war took his brothers. He had sworn he'd never answer another call again. At his feet lay Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a coat like smoke and ash. The dog's ears twitched at every rumble of wind, his muscles tense under the fur. He had the sharp, disciplined stillness of a trained canine, yet his amber eyes held a sadness too human. The dog had been through his own war, retired after losing part of his unit in an explosion. Ethan saw the same haunted look in him that he saw in the mirror every morning. Survivors who had forgotten how to live. The cabin's radio crackled once, then died. Outside, the wind screamed again, a familiar sound of chaos, only this time, nature was the enemy. Rex rose suddenly, tail stiff, ears locked forward. His growl came low and steady like a tremor. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. The dog bolted toward the door, barking once, sharp, urgent. Ethan's instincts, long buried, kicked in. He grabbed his parka, his flashlight, and his snow goggles from the wall. When he stepped outside, the cold hit him like a physical blow. Snow lashed at his face, and visibility was nearly zero. But through the swirling white, he saw it. A faint glimmer down the slope, flickering like a dying star. A car's headlights. His pulse quickened. Somewhere deep inside, the soldier he had locked away whispered, "Move." He trudged down through waist-deep snow, Rex bounding ahead, barking against the wind. The slope was slick, treacherous, littered with hidden rocks. When he reached the source, his beam cut through the snow and landed on a black SUV half buried, its front end smashed against a pine. Steam rose faintly from the hood, and the windshield was fractured like frozen veins. Ethan's boots sank into the drift as he pressed against the door. It wouldn't budge. He peered inside. Someone was there. A woman. Her face pale as paper, her body motionless, her head slumped against the wheel. "Hang on," he muttered, his voice half lost in the storm. Using the butt of his flashlight, he shattered the side window. Glass scattered into the snow like brittle stars. The woman didn't stir. She was young, early 30s maybe, her blonde hair tangled with blood and frost, lips faintly blue. He brushed the shards from her jacket, then unbuckled her seatbelt. Rex whined beside him, circling like a shadow. Lifting her wasn't hard. Years of combat and mountain work had kept him strong. But the tremor in his hands betrayed something deeper, a fear of failing again. He wrapped her in his coat, pressing her against his chest as he whispered, "You're all right now. I've got you." By the time they reached the cabin, the storm had worsened. The wind screamed around the wooden walls, demanding entry. Ethan laid the woman on his bed, stripping away the wet layers of her clothes and replacing them with a wool blanket. Her breathing was shallow but steady. He lit another lantern, its glow painting gold across her skin. She was striking in an unguarded way, delicate features hardened by exhaustion, the kind of beauty that had known sleepless nights. He found a wallet in her jacket. Emily Hart. No phone, no ID beyond that. Nothing to tell him who she was or why she was driving alone through the mountains at night. Rex sat by the door, watching both of them. His gaze shifted from Ethan to the stranger, alert but not hostile. The storm raged on, snow hammering the windows, but inside the cabin there was a fragile kind of quiet, a heartbeat against the endless roar outside. Ethan sank onto a stool, his breath visible in the cold air. He'd rescued people before, back when it was his job, back when he believed saving one life could change something. But this was different. He didn't know this woman. He didn't want to care. Yet he couldn't walk away either. Maybe Rex was right to bark. Maybe fate still had one call left for a man who thought he'd stopped answering them. When Emily finally stirred, hours later, she blinked up at the wooden ceiling, confusion clouding her blue eyes. "Where am I?" Her voice was weak, dry. Ethan leaned forward, his shadow crossing the light. "Safe," he said simply. "You're safe. For now." She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her shoulder, and she winced. "You were lucky," he added, turning away to pour her water. Another hour out there and the cold would have done what the crash didn't. She studied him quietly, seeing the distance in his face, the careful restraint in every word. "Who are you?" she whispered. Ethan hesitated, then replied, "No one important. Just a man who still knows how to find the lost." Rex lifted his head, tail brushing the floor once. Emily reached out hesitantly, her fingers trembling as they met the dog's fur. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, resting his head against her palm. A warmth passed through the cabin that had nothing to do with the fire. Ethan turned away, staring into the flames as if they could erase the ghosts of his past. "Rest," he said quietly. "You're safe here. Until the snow stops." His voice was rough, but for the first time in years it carried something unfamiliar. Hope. Morning came reluctantly to the mountains, thin gray light seeping through the frosted windows. The storm had weakened but left a heavy silence behind, a silence so dense it pressed against the walls of the cabin. Emily Hart sat up slowly, wrapped in a wool blanket. Her blonde hair, once glossy, now clung to her face in damp strands. The firelight painted her features in warm hues, tired blue eyes, a small scar by her chin, and the faint tremor of someone who had fought too long against fear. Her hands, delicate but scarred at the knuckles, gripped the cup of steaming coffee Ethan had placed by her side without a word. Ethan Cole stood near the window, one hand resting on the frame, staring out into the white horizon. His posture was rigid, military. Shoulders squared, back straight even in rest, his beard caught the morning light, revealing streaks of silver that matched the frost outside. He wore a faded navy sweatshirt, the insignia nearly rubbed off by time, and loose cargo pants tucked into boots that had seen too many years. There was still something of the soldier in him, the stillness before a strike, the discipline of someone who expected danger to walk through the door at any moment. But in his gray eyes, there was no spark. Only the dull reflection of a man surviving, not living. The cabin itself was a map of his past. On the far wall hung a folded Navy flag, perfectly pressed, next to a photo of 6 men standing shoulder to shoulder in desert fatigues, all grinning beneath a scorching sun. In the center of the group, younger, clean-shaven and proud, was Ethan. A combat knife rested on a shelf below it, the handle carved with small notches, 5 marks, one for each man who didn't make it home. The air smelled faintly of pine and gun oil. Emily noticed all of it in silence, reading the unspoken history of a man who had built walls not to protect himself from others, but to contain his ghosts. When she finally spoke, her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "You saved my life," she said, eyes down. "I should at least know who I'm thanking." Ethan didn't turn around. "No need," he replied. "Storm did the hard part. I just happened to be here." His tone was flat, distant, the voice of someone who'd forgotten how to talk to people. Emily frowned slightly. "You're not much of a conversationalist, are you?" That earned her the faintest hint of a smile, more of a shadow than an expression. "Words never stopped a bullet," he said. Then, softer, as if realizing the cruelty of his own response, "Eat something. You'll need the strength." Rex sat between them, his ears twitching at every word. The dog had positioned himself close to Emily's feet, his massive head resting on his paws. He seemed perfectly at ease beside her, as though the choice was deliberate, a small rebellion against his master's solitude. When Ethan moved closer, Rex's tail gave a slow wag, but his gaze stayed fixed on Emily. It was rare for the German Shepherd to warm up to anyone. Ethan knew that too well. For years, Rex hadn't let another soul touch him. And yet now, this stranger's hand brushed against his fur, and he accepted it without hesitation. Emily studied Ethan again. "You were military?" she said softly, her eyes on the flag. "Seals?" He stiffened at the word, his hand freezing mid-motion as he poured coffee into his own cup. "Was," he said. "A long time ago." She didn't push. But she had seen that look before. Reporters always did. It was the look of a man haunted by things he could neither forget nor explain. "I'm a journalist," she said finally, testing the air between them. Or was. The word slipped from her lips the same way his had, broken by regret. Ethan's gaze flicked toward her, brief but sharp. "Journalist, huh? You don't look like one." "What does a journalist look like?" she asked, defensive but curious. He took a sip of his coffee, eyes never leaving her. "Usually they don't end up unconscious in a snowstorm." She smiled faintly. "Usually they don't end up being rescued by a Navy SEAL either." That almost drew a chuckle, but it died in his throat. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was just heavy. Two people who didn't belong in the same room, trapped there by fate and snow. A knock broke the stillness. Not a real knock, more a scrape, wood against wood. Ethan tensed immediately. His hand went to the rifle propped near the door. Rex was on his feet in an instant, ears forward, body coiled. Then came a voice, muffled but familiar, calling through the wind. "Ethan, you in there?" Ethan's posture eased, and he lowered the gun. "Grace," he muttered under his breath. He opened the door to reveal a woman bundled in a massive brown coat, cheeks red from the cold. Grace Mitchell was in her 60s, short and sturdy, with a crown of white curls peeking from her hat and eyes as sharp as a hawk's. She owned the general store down the mountain and checked on Ethan once every few weeks, the only person in town who dared to. "Lord above, Ethan Cole, I thought you'd frozen up here," she said, brushing snow from her shoulders as she stepped inside. She stopped short when she saw Emily. "Oh, well now, who's this?" Her tone was warm, but her eyes flicked between them, reading the tension. "Accident," Ethan replied shortly. "Found her last night. She'll leave when the road's clear." Grace raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Well, aren't you the Good Samaritan?" Then, turning to Emily with genuine kindness, "You poor thing. You must be half frozen. There's soup in my truck if you're hungry." Emily smiled weakly, grateful. "Thank you, ma'am." Grace waved a mittened hand. "None of that ma'am business, dear. Name's Grace. You just rest. Ethan here acts like a rock, but don't let him fool you. He's got a soft spot under all that beard." Ethan grunted. "Grace," she smirked. "What? It's true." Rex's tail thumped once against the floor as if agreeing. When Grace left an hour later, the cabin felt smaller somehow, the silence more intimate. Ethan stood at the window again, watching the clouds shift. Emily broke it gently. "She cares about you." "She's nosy," he said. "Same thing," Emily replied. For the first time, he looked directly at her. His eyes were storm gray, but there was a flicker there, something fragile, almost human. He sighed, the sound long and weary. "You should rest. The storm's not done yet." As night fell, Emily lay awake, listening to the wind whisper against the cabin. Across the room, Ethan sat by the fire, staring at the flames like a man watching memories burn. Rex lay between them, breathing slow and steady. Emily studied the outline of the soldier in the dim light, the broad shoulders, the scars on his arms, the quiet strength that filled the room. He was a man who'd built a world small enough to survive in, and she, for reasons she couldn't explain, had just stepped into it. The snow had calmed, but the air was still sharp enough to bite through bone. The morning sun struggled to pierce the gray haze, glinting weakly off the frost that coated Ethan's pickup. Ethan Cole crouched beside the SUV that had nearly killed Emily, a wrench in his hand, his breath fogging the air. The storm had buried half the tires, and the hood creaked as he forced it open. His movements were steady, mechanical. Hands that had once disarmed bombs now fixed engines with the same cold precision. A faint scar curved along his jaw, the kind left by shrapnel or a blade, catching the pale light whenever he looked up. He wasn't thinking about the woman inside the cabin. He told himself that. But every so often, his eyes drifted toward the window, where he could see a flicker of her silhouette moving behind the curtains. Rex padded silently around the truck, his paws crunching in the snow. The dog's breath puffed white, and his amber eyes scanned the tree line. Then, abruptly, he froze. His tail stiffened, and a low growl built in his throat. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" Rex didn't respond. He never did. Instead, he circled the rear of the SUV head low, sniffing near the undercarriage. The growl deepened. Ethan set the wrench aside and crouched next to him. That was when he saw it, small, black, magnetic, blinking faintly beneath the frame. A tracking beacon. For a split second, Ethan's breath hitched. The blinking light was rhythmic, steady, professional, not a cheap civilian model. His mind snapped back into military mode, the muscle memory of survival. He reached out, detached the device carefully, and studied it in his gloved hand. It was military grade with no serial markings. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. The wind carried the words into the stillness. Inside, Emily was warming her hands by the fire when the door burst open. Ethan stepped in, the cold following him. Snow clung to his boots and the hem of his coat. He tossed the small tracker onto the table, where it landed with a dull thud. The red light blinked in defiance. "You want to tell me why someone planted military hardware under your car?" he asked quietly. His tone wasn't angry. It was the calm before the storm, the voice of a man who had seen too much deceit to take anything at face value. Emily turned pale, the color draining from her face. "Oh, God," she whispered. "They found me." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Who?" She hesitated, clutching the edge of the table. "I was investigating West Vale Energy," she said finally, her voice shaking. "A multinational. On paper they're clean, but I found evidence of illegal drilling, money laundering, even deaths covered up as accidents. My editor told me to drop it. The next day my phone was hacked. Then someone broke into my apartment." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I ran. I thought I could disappear for a while." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. The firelight flickered across his face, deepening the shadows under his eyes. "You didn't disappear," he said. "You led them straight here." He crossed the room, took the tracker, and ripped open the back panel. A thin spark snapped as he pulled the battery. Then, without hesitation, he tossed it into the fireplace. The plastic casing curled and melted, the red light dying in a hiss of smoke. Rex growled low, pacing in front of the fire as if the machine were still alive. "They'll come," Ethan said. "Whoever they are, they'll come looking for it when it stops transmitting." Emily sank into the chair by the hearth. Her voice broke. "You don't have to help me." Ethan's laugh was humorless. "Too late for that. They already know my location." He turned to the dog. "Pack up, Rex." The German shepherd tilted his head, then padded toward the corner where Ethan kept his old duffel bag. The man began pulling supplies: ammunition, a map, flares, a first aid kit. Every motion was efficient, instinctive, like a man slipping back into a skin he thought he'd shed. Emily watched him, bewildered. "You were a SEAL, weren't you?" she said softly. Ethan didn't answer at first. He zipped the bag shut, then looked up. "Was," he replied, "and I promised I'd never be one again." He slung the duffel over his shoulder. "But promises don't mean much when people start dying." Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, before darting to the window. His ears flattened, his gaze fixed on the tree line beyond the clearing. Ethan followed his line of sight but saw nothing yet. Still, he trusted the dog more than any equipment. "We're leaving," he said firmly. He turned to Emily. "Dress warm. Take only what you need." She hesitated. "Where are we going?" "Farther up," he replied. "There's an old ranger outpost. Hard to reach, but it'll buy us time." Minutes later, the three of them were outside. The air was biting, and the world had turned to shades of white and gray. Ethan started his truck, the engine groaning before catching. Rex leapt into the passenger seat, sitting upright, his gaze scanning the horizon. Emily climbed in, clutching her satchel like it contained her entire life. The road was narrow and half buried in snow, winding between pines that looked like black sentinels against the sky. Halfway up the trail, Ethan's instincts screamed. He slowed the truck, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Through the curtain of snow, he saw a shape, two sets of headlights glimmering faintly in the distance. Not locals. No one sane drove this route after a storm. "We've got company," he said quietly. He switched off the lights, guiding the truck off the road behind a ridge. They waited in silence, hearts pounding. A minute later, the sound came. Engines, slow and deliberate, crawling closer. Emily's breath hitched. "They found us already?" Ethan's hands clenched the wheel. "No, they're scouting. But they will." He turned to her, voice low but steady. "You trust me?" "Do I have a choice?" she whispered. He almost smiled. "Not really." He started the truck again, but this time veered north, away from the trail. The tires fought against the snow, the engine growling like a beast resisting the cold. By dusk, the truck reached the edge of a frozen creek. The sky had turned violet, the mountains bleeding into darkness. Ethan parked beside a cluster of fallen pines. "We'll stay here tonight," he said, stepping out. The temperature had dropped fast. The cold was an invisible hand squeezing the life from the air. Rex jumped down beside him, nose to the wind, then barked once. Approval. Ethan glanced at Emily, who was shivering despite the layers. "You'll need to keep that fire close," he said, setting down a portable stove. "You ever camped before?" "Only in a newsroom," she muttered, rubbing her hands. For the first time since the chaos began, Ethan laughed. Quiet, short, but real. It startled her. "Then this'll be new for both of us," he said. As night enveloped them, Rex lay between them, his body heat warming the air. The forest was eerily still, the only sound the crackle of fire and the distant echo of engines fading into the distance. For now, they had escaped. But Ethan knew better than anyone, being hunted wasn't about running. It was about how long you could keep moving before you stopped believing you could win. The forest loomed like a cathedral of ghosts, every tree draped in snow so heavy it bent under its own silence. The storm had calmed for a few hours, but the wind still whispered through the pines, carrying a low, mournful sound. Ethan Cole trudged forward through knee-deep snow, his breath clouding in the air. His beard was crusted with frost, and his gray eyes scanned the terrain with trained precision, cataloging every ridge, every shadow, every possible escape route. His parka was old but military grade, the fabric scarred from years of use. Behind him, Emily followed, wrapped in Ethan's spare coat that hung loosely over her smaller frame. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her lips cracked, and each step seemed heavier than the last. She was no longer the composed journalist she had been when she entered his cabin. Fear and exhaustion had stripped away her poise, leaving only raw determination. Rex moved ahead, a dark shape gliding through white. His fur had collected bits of frost, turning him into a living phantom. He stopped occasionally to sniff the air, ears pricked, tail still. The German shepherd's body was taut, alert, every muscle alive with instinct. To Ethan, Rex wasn't just a companion. He was radar, compass, and guardian, all in one. The snow crunched beneath their boots in rhythmic defiance of the wilderness's vast quiet. Somewhere behind them, down in the valley, Ethan imagined the men who were coming, armed, patient, methodical. He'd trained men like that once. Now he was the quarry. As daylight faded, the world bled into shades of blue and silver. They reached an old ranger station hidden among the trees, its roof sagging under snow. The wooden sign out front was barely legible. Wind River Lookout, closed since 1999. Ethan forced the door open with a grunt. The interior was cramped but dry, filled with the smell of dust, oil, and old pine. A broken cot leaned against the wall, a rusted lantern hung from a nail, and in one corner, a wood stove sat covered in cobwebs. "It'll do," he muttered. Emily sank onto a bench, her breath shaking. "You've been here before?" Places like this, Ethan replied, setting his pack down. Different storms. Same ghosts. Rex padded around the cabin, nose close to the floorboards, then stopped near a window, tail twitching. Ethan understood. The dog was uneasy. Still, they needed warmth. He cleared the stove and lit a small fire, feeding it carefully with sticks and splinters of broken furniture. The light cast a soft, amber glow across the room, painting Emily's face in flickering gold. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of fire and the wind pushing against the cabin's thin walls. Then, quietly, Emily asked, "Were you ever afraid? When you were out there?" Ethan looked up. His eyes, shadowed by the firelight, were unreadable. "I was afraid," he said, his voice low, deliberate, "when I had no one left to save." He leaned back against the wall, staring into the flames. "Out there, fear kept you sharp. It made you move. But when the mission ended and there was no one waiting, fear just stays." Emily's gaze softened. She wanted to speak but couldn't. In the dim light, she saw him not as the stoic soldier, but as a man carrying invisible weight, every scar a story he refused to tell. They ate in silence. A ration bar cut into halves, boiled snow for water. Outside, the wind began to rise again, rattling the windows. Rex's ears twitched. The dog stood, muscles tightening, and gave a low, steady growl. Ethan froze. "What is it, boy?" Rex moved toward the door, head low, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. Then Ethan heard it too, faint, distant, mechanical, a hum that didn't belong to nature. Engines. He doused the fire instantly, plunging the room into shadow. "Lights out," he whispered. Emily's heart began to hammer. The warmth vanished, replaced by the heavy breath of fear. Through a crack in the window's frost, Ethan peered into the storm. Two beams of light cut through the trees like twin spears, headlights, slow and searching. "They're close," he murmured. Emily swallowed hard. "How could they find us so fast?" "We left tracks," Ethan said. "Snow hides everything except the truth." He moved silently to his pack and pulled out a rifle, the metal cold and dull. It wasn't military issue, but it was clean, well kept. He chambered around with quiet precision, the click swallowed by the wind. Rex stayed by the window, barely breathing. The dog's instincts were a barometer for danger, and right now, every line of his body screamed alert. Ethan motioned to Emily, "Stay behind me. If they come in, you crawl under the cot and don't move." "What about you?" she whispered. "I'll be outside." He pulled his hood up, adjusted his gloves, and looked down at Rex. "With me." The dog's tail gave a single flick. Acknowledgement, loyalty, readiness. Outside, the storm had begun again, snow sweeping sideways in violent bursts. Ethan crouched behind a snowbank, his rifle steady against his shoulder. The headlights drew closer, stopping about 50 yards away. Two silhouettes stepped out of the truck, men in heavy tactical gear, black parkas blending into the night. One carried a flashlight, the other scanned the area with binoculars. Ethan's trained eyes noted the details instantly. Silenced pistols, throat mics, no insignia. Professionals. "Private contractors," he muttered under his breath. He'd seen their type before. Guns for hire, paid by corporations to make problems disappear. Rex crouched beside him, ears pinned, breath steady. One of the men spoke, his voice faint through the wind. "The signal died around here. Spread out. The tracker's offline." The other nodded and moved toward the tree line. Ethan held his breath. Snow drifted from the branches, masking sound, but not movement. The first man's flashlight beam skimmed dangerously close to the ranger station window. Inside, Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, praying Rex wouldn't bark. Then a sound, a branch snapping under weight. The second man turned sharply, weapon raised. "You hear that?" he barked. A second too late, Ethan and Rex had already shifted positions, moving like shadows across the snow. They disappeared into the white before the light could catch them. The men cursed, scanning the trees. One clicked his radio. "North sector clear, nothing yet." The other responded, "Stay sharp. If she's here, she won't be alone." Their words were carried away by the wind. Ethan waited until they were gone, the hum of their truck fading into the distance. Then he exhaled, the air steaming from his mouth. He turned to Rex and whispered, "Good boy." They crept back toward the cabin. Emily met him at the door, her face pale. "Are they gone?" "For now," he said. "They'll be back. They always come back." He looked at Rex, whose fur was dusted white with snow, his amber eyes still locked on the dark forest beyond. The dog gave a low, rumbling growl that felt more like prophecy than warning. Inside, Ethan stoked the fire back to life, its warmth returning reluctantly. Emily sat near it, arms wrapped around herself. "How long can we keep running?" she asked softly. Ethan stared into the flames, the reflection dancing in his eyes. "As long as it takes," he said, "until the storm gives us cover, or takes us both." Rex lay between them, tail curled around his body, one eye half open. Outside, the wind howled again, swallowing the night whole. The storm had returned with a vengeance. Snow whipped sideways in furious gusts, blurring shapes into ghosts and sounds into whispers. Ethan Cole moved like a shadow through the trees, his rifle held low, breath steady but shallow. The cold clawed at his skin, biting through layers of fabric, but his body didn't falter. Years of Navy SEAL conditioning turned pain into background noise. Behind him, Rex darted between trees, silent and focused, his black and gray coat streaked white with frost. His amber eyes gleamed like two burning coals, always scanning, always reading the unseen. Somewhere in the distance, Emily was hidden, crouched beneath a fallen pine where he had told her to stay no matter what. He had looked her in the eye before leaving and said, "Don't move until I come back, no matter what you hear." The terror in her gaze had said everything. Rex stopped suddenly, muscles tensing. He crouched, ears flicking toward a faint rhythm beneath the wind, the crunch of boots. Ethan raised a hand, signaling down. They dropped low behind a snowbank as two men appeared through the storm. The flashlights on their rifles swept through the trees, beams cutting through flakes like knives. Both wore tactical winter gear, matte black coats, night vision goggles, and silencers screwed onto their carbines. Their movements were methodical, not frantic. These weren't amateurs. They were trained, paid, and determined. Ethan could tell from their formation alone that they'd been briefed. Fan out, maintain sight lines, advance slow. The same way he used to move in enemy territory. He counted their pace, breathing with the storm. When one of them turned slightly, exposing the side of his chest, Ethan moved. The rifle cracked once, short, efficient, merciless. The man collapsed into the snow without a sound. The other spun around, flashlight swinging wildly. "Mason?" he hissed into his radio. No response. Ethan fired again. The second bullet caught him in the shoulder. The man stumbled, dropped his weapon, and vanished behind a tree. Ethan didn't chase. He turned to Rex. "Go." The single word carried weight, a command Rex understood instantly. The dog leapt away, vanishing into the snow. Moments later, distant barking erupted in the opposite direction, loud, taunting, deliberate. The perfect distraction. Gunfire followed, suppressed but sharp, echoing between trunks. Ethan sprinted low, every movement controlled. His breath came in harsh clouds, boots kicking up powder. He reached Emily's hiding spot, crouched beside her. She was trembling, her face ghostly in the dim light. "What happened?" she whispered. "You said you'd—" "Move," he interrupted. "We've got to get higher. They'll flank us." She hesitated only a second before grabbing her bag. The two began to climb the slope, their steps sinking deep into the snow. Halfway up, the forest opened into a clearing, a wide, windswept ridge overlooking the frozen head. Valley below. It might have been beautiful if it wasn't soaked in danger. Ethan turned to scan behind them. Figures moved through the trees, more of them now. 4, maybe 5. "They split into teams," he muttered. 2 on us, 3 chasing Rex." "He's just a dog," Emily said. "They'll kill him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He's not just anything." His eyes narrowed, fierce under the frost. "He's my partner." They reached a cluster of rocks and took cover. Emily crouched beside him, gasping for breath. She wasn't built for this. Her legs shook, her lungs burned, but something in her refused to stop. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe trust, maybe the strange calm that came from knowing a man like Ethan wouldn't let her die. He scanned the tree line, waiting for movement. The snow muffled everything, and that silence was worse than gunfire. He used to call it the breath of death, the moment before violence revealed itself. Then came the sound, a low crunch behind them. Ethan swung around, rifle raised. A man emerged from the white, tall and broad-shouldered, his black mask flecked with frost. He was older than the others, maybe mid-40s, with cold blue eyes and the rigid posture of someone who'd spent half his life taking orders. The scar across his cheek told Ethan everything. Combat veteran, not mercenary muscle. The man lifted his weapon but didn't shoot. "You're good," he said through the mask, his voice deep and unhurried. "Too good for a ghost." Ethan didn't answer. The man continued. "I read your file. SEAL Team 14, Kabul, 2008. Thought you were dead." "Guess I'm hard to bury," Ethan said flatly. He adjusted his stance, finger brushing the trigger. The man smirked. "You always were, Cole. Shame you picked the wrong side." That name, Wade Merrick, hit him when the man lowered his mask. Wade had once been part of his own unit, a demolitions expert, fearless, brilliant, but reckless, court-martialed for smuggling arms. Ethan had testified against him. Now he understood. Westvale Energy hadn't hired random soldiers. They'd hired ghosts from the same grave he crawled out of. Before either could move, Rex appeared through the storm like a specter, launching from the ridge behind Wade. The man barely turned before the dog slammed into him, teeth sinking into his arm. Wade roared, swinging his gun wildly. Ethan dove forward, tackling him into the snow. The rifle fired once, sparks slicing through the air. Wade kicked free, punching hard into Ethan's ribs. Years of training turned the pain into motion. Ethan grabbed Wade's arm, twisted, and forced him down. The snow turned red where the dog's teeth held fast. Wade gasped, fury and disbelief in his eyes. "You should have stayed dead," he hissed. Ethan's reply was a whisper. "So should you." He slammed the rifle butt into Wade's temple. The man went still. Ethan stood, chest heaving. Blood streaked across his glove. Rex limped slightly, his fur matted with snow and streaks of red, but his eyes burned with wild determination. "Good boy," Ethan breathed, kneeling to press his forehead against the dog's. Emily crawled out from behind the rocks, eyes wide with horror. "Is he—" "Alive," Ethan said, "but he won't be for long if we don't move." He stripped the man's radio and earpiece, pocketing them. Static hissed. A voice crackled through, tense and urgent. "Unit 2, report. Merrick, do you copy?" Ethan looked toward the valley, where faint headlights still glowed. "They'll know he's down," he muttered. "We're out of time." He turned to Emily. "We head east. There's a ravine. They can't follow easily with vehicles." She nodded, shaken, but resolute. "And Rex?" Ethan glanced at the dog, who stood proudly despite his limp. "He leads," he said simply. "He always does." The storm thickened again, swallowing them whole. Behind, in the snow-covered clearing, Wade Merrick stirred faintly, the wind carrying his ragged laughter through the trees. "You can run, Cole," he rasped to the empty air, "but I'm not done with you yet." His voice faded into the storm, blending with the howl of the wind and the distant echo of engines awakening for the next hunt. The snowstorm was dying, but the forest had turned into a graveyard of silence. The wind was thinner now, laced with gunsmoke instead of frost. Ethan Cole knelt behind a fallen log, his breath clouding in the air, his rifle resting steady on the bark. His heart beat slow, measured, not from calm, but from years of training that taught him to master fear until it obeyed. Beside him, Rex crouched low, his flanks streaked with blood from the fight earlier. The German shepherd's breathing was shallow, but his eyes still burned with fire, unyielding. Ahead, beyond the frost and drifting smoke, Emily Hart huddled near a frozen rock ledge. Her coat was torn, her face pale against the bruised sky, but her eyes were alive, bright, defiant, terrified. She wasn't a soldier, yet she had refused to run. Ethan peeked over the log. Shadows moved. 4 figures, dark shapes weaving between trees. They were closing in fast, spreading out with silent precision. The radio crackled on Ethan's shoulder, the voice distorted by static. It was Wade Merrick's tone, low, steady, and mocking. "You always had a way with goodbyes, Cole," the voice rasped. "I told them not to shoot the girl yet. You should thank me." Ethan muted the channel, jaw tightening. His ribs ached where Wade had struck him earlier. He could still feel the ghost of the impact, like the bruise of betrayal. He glanced toward Rex, whose ears perked despite the pain. "One last dance, buddy," Ethan whispered. Rex wagged his tail once, a slow, deliberate motion, more promise than energy. A shot rang out. Bark splintered near Ethan's head. He ducked and rolled, pulling the trigger twice in response. Two flashes bloomed in the white distance, one figure collapsing, the other retreating behind a tree. Emily flinched at the sound but didn't scream. She pressed herself deeper into the snow, clutching the pistol Ethan had given her, a small Sig Sauer, light enough for her to hold steady. Her hands trembled, but her jaw set firm. She had already made peace with fear. Now she was just trying to survive it. Wade appeared out of the haze like a phantom, tall, broad-shouldered, his parka open enough to show the tactical vest beneath. His face was cut, bruised, but the glint in his icy eyes was the same one Ethan remembered from years ago. Pride without conscience. He moved with the confidence of a predator who thought the hunt was over. "You don't learn, do you?" Wade called, voice carrying through the storm. "You should have let me finish that op in Kabul. We could have been gods." Ethan rose halfway from cover, his rifle steady. "I'm not interested in being a god," he said quietly. "I just want to go home." Wade grinned, a flash of white in the gray air. "You don't have a home. Men like us don't." Before Ethan could answer, movement flickered at the edge of his vision. One of Wade's men, circling wide, rifle raised. Emily saw it first. "Ethan!" she shouted. The mercenary turned, weapon aimed squarely at her. Time slowed. The click of the safety, the whisper of the wind, and then Rex exploded from the snow like a streak of black lightning. The dog slammed into the gunman's arm, teeth sinking deep into flesh. The man screamed, firing blindly. The shot hit Rex in the shoulder, blood misting into the cold air. But the shepherd didn't release. He twisted, dragging the man down into the snow. Ethan's instincts took over. He fired twice, one shot to the chest, one to the neck. The man went still. But another mercenary rushed in from the side, shouting. Ethan pivoted, firing again, then lunged forward to shield Rex. Bullets cut through the branches above, showering snow. Emily crawled from cover, eyes wide with panic. "Rex!" she gasped. The dog whimpered but stayed between her and danger, his breath coming in harsh bursts. Ethan crouched beside him, his glove pressing against the wound. "Stay with me, soldier," he murmured. "You've been through worse." Wade's voice came again, closer now, sharper. "You really brought her into this? A journalist? Christ, Cole, you always had a death wish." Ethan rose, the rifle aimed at the voice. "You brought this," he said coldly. "All I did was try to bury what you became." There was movement, a flicker of black coat, and Ethan fired. Wade ducked, returning fire. The bullets ripped through a tree trunk inches from Ethan's head. He dove behind cover, rolled, and came up firing again. Years of training, decades of instinct, everything old inside him came alive again. He could almost hear the echo of his old team, shouting commands, laughing in the dust, ghosts fighting through him. Then came the sound. Sirens, distant but rising. Ethan froze for a split second. He had called in the signal an hour ago through the emergency radio he'd salvaged from the ranger outpost. State troopers, maybe a rescue chopper if the weather held. But Wade heard it too. "You think they'll save you?" Wade shouted, reloading. "They won't even find your bodies." He stepped forward, his pistol raised. Ethan's rifle clicked empty. Time narrowed to breath, muscle, memory. He stood, eyes locked on Wade. Both men fired at once. The impact threw Ethan backward into the snow. The wind knocked from his chest. Pain flared along his ribs, but he was alive. Wade staggered, clutching his shoulder where the bullet tore through. His gun fell. For a moment the two stared at each other, warriors stripped of purpose, two sides of the same ruin. Then a voice boomed through the storm. "State Police, drop your weapons!" Flashlights flared through the trees. Wade turned, furious, defiant. "This isn't over, Cole," he roared. But before he could reach his weapon, officers swarmed him, forcing him to the ground. Ethan barely registered the shouting. He dropped to his knees beside Rex, whose head rested limply in the snow. Blood darkened his fur, staining the white beneath him. Emily knelt too, tears freezing on her cheeks. "He's not breathing," she whispered. Ethan pressed his ear close, listening. Then relief washed over him. The faint, slow thump of a heartbeat. "He's fighting," Ethan said softly, almost to himself. "He always fights." He lifted the dog carefully into his arms, cradling him like something sacred. "You saved us again, didn't you, boy?" His voice cracked. "You always do." As the officers took Wade and his men away, the storm finally broke. The first rays of dawn spilled across the forest, turning the snow to pale gold. Ethan stood, Rex in his arms, Emily beside him. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of survival, not as a burden, but as a gift. The ghosts in his mind went quiet. The mission at last was over. The morning after the storm was painfully bright. The world, once choked by wind and snow, lay still beneath a sky of pure, aching blue. A thin column of smoke rose from the field hospital tent set up at the edge of the highway, where emergency vehicles idled and police milled about like ghosts coming down from adrenaline. Ethan Cole stood outside the veterinary van, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the door that had swallowed Rex an hour ago. His face was pale beneath the streaks of dried blood and frostbite, the lines around his mouth deeper than before. His gray beard was flecked with ice, his eyes distant, half in the present, half somewhere years away, on other battlefields where brothers bled out in his arms. Only now, the brother wore fur and had saved him more times than any man ever did. Inside the van, a young veterinarian named Dr. Hannah Rivera worked quietly, her gloved hands moving with focus and care. She was in her early 30s, petite, with olive skin and dark eyes that carried both exhaustion and gentleness. Stray curls of black hair escaped the knot beneath her beanie. She'd volunteered to stay through the night when they brought Rex in. One look at the old soldier's face was enough to tell her she couldn't say no. "He's lost a lot of blood," she murmured, half to herself, as she tightened a bandage over the shepherd's shoulder. "But he's strong. I've seen dogs like this before, military canines. They don't quit easily." She paused and glanced toward the small window, where she could see Ethan's silhouette standing in the cold. "And neither do their handlers." Emily Hart sat nearby on a metal bench, her knees drawn to her chest, wrapped in a heavy blanket. Her blonde hair hung loose now, tangled and unkempt, and the fatigue on her face softened her usual sharpness. She hadn't slept since the night before. Her hands still trembled faintly from shock, though she refused to admit it. When Hannah finished stitching and stepped back, Emily asked, voice hoarse, "Will he live?" The vet smiled faintly. "If love counts for anything, he already has." Outside, Ethan hadn't moved. The world seemed to pass around him, sirens fading, officers talking, snow beginning to melt under the newborn sun. But he stood still, a figure carved from the mountain itself. Emily approached slowly, her boots crunching softly on the icy ground. "He's stable," she said. Her voice was gentle, hesitant, as though afraid to disturb the fragile quiet between them. "Dr. Rivera said he'll make it." Ethan's shoulders dropped the faintest bit, the first visible crack in his armor. He nodded once, but said nothing. Emily stepped beside him, their shadows long against the snow. "You should let her treat your ribs too," she added. "They're bruised." He exhaled sharply through his nose, half a laugh, half disbelief. "I've had worse." "I don't doubt it," she said, glancing at him. "But I don't think anyone's ever had you like this." They stood in silence. A police officer, a young man with freckles and nervous eyes, walked over to confirm Wade Merrick's capture. "He's in custody, sir," the officer said. "They're transferring him to the state facility. The rest of his team's being questioned." Ethan simply nodded again. The officer hesitated, clearly wanting to thank him, but something in Ethan's demeanor, too still, too hollow, kept the words lodged in his throat. He left quietly, boots crunching away through the slush. Emily watched him go, then turned back to Ethan. "You should tell your story," she said. "People need to hear what you did." Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where the sunlight turned the snow to molten silver. "No one needs to hear about ghosts," he said. "Besides, this was your story all along." Emily shook her head. "It's ours now." 3 days later, in a small cabin room provided by the sheriff's department, Ethan sat by Rex's side as the dog slept under a blanket, one paw bandaged, his breathing deep and steady. Emily sat at the table across from them, typing on her laptop. The rhythmic clicks of the keys filled the quiet like a heartbeat. She had regained color in her cheeks, her focus sharpened by purpose. The article she was writing wasn't just about West Vale energy anymore. It was about truth, loyalty, and the strange heroism found in forgotten corners of the world. She looked up once, studying Ethan. The way the light caught his features, the rough stubble, the faint scar under his left eye, the stoicism etched into every motion, made her realize how much he carried without complaint. He wasn't just a soldier, he was the last proof that decency hadn't died with his generation. When she finished writing, she read the final paragraph aloud, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't want his name printed. Said it didn't matter. But if anyone ever asks me what courage looks like, I'll tell them it's a man who once fought wars for his country, and when the world forgot him, he still chose to save it again, with his dog by his side. Ethan said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, "That's too kind." Emily smiled faintly. "No," she said. "It's too true." The article went live 2 days later. It spread faster than either of them expected. News networks picked it up, social media filled with photos of Rex recovering, and strangers from across the country wrote letters to the Wind River station, thanking the nameless veteran for reminding them that humanity still existed in its simplest form. Donations poured in for Rex's care, and a nonprofit for retired K-9 units offered to cover his medical expenses. When a local reporter managed to identify Ethan and came to ask for an interview, he refused. The dog did most of the work, he said, and closed the door. But later that night, when Ethan was the snow began falling again, soft this time, not cruel. He stood at the window of the cabin, looking out into the vast white wilderness. Behind him, Rex stirred in his sleep, tail twitching. Emily, sitting by the fire with a notebook, looked up and caught his reflection in the glass. "You know," she said quietly, "for someone who doesn't want attention, you're pretty terrible at staying invisible." He turned, the faintest smile ghosting across his lips. "Guess the snow's not the only thing that gives me away." Outside, dawn stretched across the mountains, a clean, golden light that melted the scars of the night before. Inside, 3 survivors shared the silence of peace for the first time. And though Ethan didn't say it aloud, as he watched Rex breathe softly beside him, he knew the war inside him had finally ended. 3 months passed, and winter finally loosened its grip on Wind River. The snow that had once buried the pines melted into silver streams winding through the valley, and the air carried the soft scent of pine resin and thawed earth. The cabin that had once looked like a fortress against loneliness now stood warm under the afternoon sun. Ethan Cole worked on the porch, hammering the last wooden plank into place. His hands were rough, scarred, the kind of hands shaped by both war and rebuilding. His beard had grown thicker, but neatly trimmed, and there was color in his face again. Sunlight had replaced the gray of exhaustion. The man who had once survived by silence was now living by rhythm. The crack of nails, the creak of timber, the sound of life returning. Inside, the walls bore new memories. Ethan had cleaned every corner of the cabin, not out of duty, but care. Above the mantel hung 2 photographs. One, a faded picture of his SEAL team in desert uniforms, 6 men standing shoulder to shoulder under a burning sun. The other, a recent snapshot taken by Emily, a candid one of Ethan kneeling beside Rex, the dog wearing his new medal on his collar, the veteran smiling with something that wasn't quite pride, but peace. Between the 2 frames, he'd hung a small brass tag engraved with 4 words, "For those who stayed." Rex padded into the doorway, stretching lazily. His coat had fully grown back, glistening with health, the scars along his shoulder just visible beneath the fur. The medal, a silver insignia shaped like a shield, caught the light as he moved. He had become something of a local hero, the face of the town's new Rescue K-9 program. The sheriff's office often called him the pride of Wind River. He didn't seem to care much for the title, though. His favorite thing was still to sprawl on the porch steps, one paw hanging over the edge, eyes half closed as if guarding the world in his sleep. A car approached from the trail, its tires crunching over gravel and damp soil. Ethan set down his hammer, shielding his eyes from the glare. The vehicle was familiar, an old green Jeep that had seen its share of miles. When the engine cut off, Emily Hart stepped out. The spring sun caught her hair, turning the blonde strands to gold. She wore jeans and a worn leather jacket, her notebook tucked under one arm. Her face had softened since that night in the mountains. There were still traces of strength in her jawline, but the tension that used to pull at her eyes was gone. She looked, for once, like a woman not running from something, but toward something. "Your porch survived another winter," she said, walking up the steps with a teasing smile. "Barely," Ethan replied, brushing sawdust from his hands. "I had to fight the boards harder than I fought Wade Merrick's men." Emily laughed softly. At least the boards didn't shoot back. Rex trotted over to her, tail wagging. She crouched down, scratching behind his ear. "You've gotten fat," she whispered. Rex gave a huff that sounded suspiciously like offense and licked her cheek in response. She smiled, eyes shining. "You still have perfect timing, soldier." Ethan leaned against the railing, watching them. There was something unspoken in his gaze, a quiet gratitude for a world that had given him a second chance. Emily noticed it, stood up, and stepped beside him. "You fixed it all," she said softly. "The cabin, the place, maybe even yourself." He looked at the horizon where the pines met the blue sky. "I'm getting there," he said, "piece by piece." They went inside. On the table lay an envelope stamped with the emblem of the Wyoming Rescue Division. Inside it was Rex's official commendation. Service Valor Medal for bravery and loyalty in the line of duty. Emily picked it up, tracing the embossed letters with her thumb. "You know," she said, "when I wrote about you, I thought people would just move on after a week. But they didn't. Your story kept spreading. Donations came in for the rescue unit. They're expanding their K-9s program across the state." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then it wasn't my story anymore." She met his gaze. "No, but it started with you." They sat together for a while, in comfortable silence. The late light filtered through the window, scattering patterns across the wooden floor. Rex lay between them, head resting on his paws, eyes closing as if lulled by their voices. Emily turned toward Ethan, her voice quieter now. "You once said you were afraid of not saving anyone." He looked at her, puzzled. She smiled. "Well, you saved me. You saved him, and in a way, you saved a part of yourself too." Ethan chuckled, low and warm. "I didn't save the world, Emily." "No," she said, "but you saved mine." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the last of the snow melted into small rivulets, feeding the roots of new grass. The forest hummed faintly with life, birds calling, water trickling, the sound of wind through young leaves. Spring had come at last, not just to the land, but to the people within it. As dusk fell, Emily prepared to leave. She lingered by the door, looking back one last time. "You know," she said softly, "there's a peace in this place I didn't think existed anymore." Ethan nodded. "It's not peace," he said, eyes following the sunset. "It's redemption wearing a quieter face." Emily smiled. "Whatever it is, I hope you keep it." She stepped outside, the golden light spilling around her as she walked to her Jeep. Rex watched her go, then looked up at Ethan, tail thumping twice against the floor. "Yeah," Ethan murmured, rubbing his head. "She'll be back." When the car disappeared down the trail, Ethan turned toward the fireplace. The flames cast a warm glow over the photo of his team, the edges curled with age. He reached up, touched the frame gently, then looked at the picture beside it, himself, Rex, and Emily. Two ghosts and a survivor, frozen in sunlight. For the first time, he didn't feel out of place in either photo. He sat by the window as night fell, Rex resting at his feet. Through the open door, the smell of earth and pine drifted in, mixing with smoke and the faint sound of the stream outside. The war inside him had gone quiet at last. He looked down at Rex and whispered, "We made it, partner." The dog lifted his head, tail wagging once before settling again. The stars began to rise above the pines, and for the first time in years, Ethan let himself believe in tomorrow. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light, but in quiet moments, When a broken man finds peace, a lost soul finds home, and a faithful dog becomes the hand of God on earth. Ethan's story reminds us that redemption is real, that no one is too lost to be found again. Perhaps, in every act of love, saving a life, comforting a stranger, forgiving ourselves, we touch something divine. If this story moved your heart, share it with someone who might need hope tonight. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of grace, courage, and faith. May God bless you, your family, and every loyal friend who still believes in second chances.